Well, welcome back to Base Camp live stream. It's so good to be with you here. It's been a couple of months since we've actually been live streaming back in November, and we were kind of in a unique period as well where we can reach more people. What began as kind of a serendipitous, spontaneous thing back last spring has actually proven to be a great way to reach a lot more people than we can at our physical base camp. So just a little bit of a backdrop. My name is Kevin DeVries, and I'm the founder and president of Grace Explorations. And one of the ministry platforms that we have is live stream, which we're experiencing right now together. So welcome, those of you that are watching on YouTube or Facebook. We're grateful that you're here. We have a great story to tell tonight by, I would consider to be a fellow ministry partner. Even though he's in the media space, we do so many things together, it feels more like kingdom work than it does anything else. One of the main things that we do at Base Camp is tell stories. So we do that because we feel like the church at large does really well with sermons and songs and the sacraments and Bible studies and socializing as well. And so we've picked the story lane because we believe that sometimes the best way to communicate the truth is through the medium of story. In fact, I think some of the best sermons are actually stories, and Christ certainly emulated that. And we're trying to follow in his footsteps and use the story medium as a way to communicate deeper truths. So we're grateful that you tuned in, and we hope to be back at Founders Brewery on February the 14th and kick off, again, another season there. And then we have 9 other locations now with Base Camp across breweries all across Michigan. There's about 2,500 guys now that have experienced that. And rather than just keep talking about that and giving you my viewpoint as someone who's kind of immersed and immersed in that process, we just want to give Dave Vanderveen an opportunity here on video to just talk about what Base Camp means to him. We try to weave that into all of our live stream here events, so it's kind of a personal testimony time, if you will. But let's just tune into Dave and have him share what Base Camp means to him.
I think I saw something on the internet, a post on Facebook or something, and I saw that. I thought, this looks interesting. And so I think maybe it was a month or two after that I showed up for the first one. Well, I wasn't sure what to really expect. I showed up, and I heard an interesting speaker. I mean, it just spoke right to my heart, and I thought, this guy is really real. And this is a message that I would not hear in church. I wouldn't hear this in the men's group. I wouldn't hear this from the pulpit. But it was a message that spoke to my heart. It was real. It was authentic. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is something I was looking for. If you're as old as I am, you've been to a lot of men's ministries. And, I would sum them all up as, bad food and lousy speakers. But Base Camp is different. It's just nothing like that. I mean, there's relevant talks. They're interesting. They're engaging. They're helpful. They're real. They're authentic. And so that's what keeps me coming back. So Base Camp is like nothing like a men's ministry that you may have experienced in the past. You need to try it. You need to go at least once. Just try it once. If you go once, you'll come back again, because it's real. It's made my life richer, fuller.
So there's a personal account of a man who was impacted with Grace Explorations, and Dave is a great friend and a partner here with us, and we thought, let's give him an opportunity to share. And there's many more of those that we have taped over the course of last fall, and so you'll be getting in pieces of that on different variety of platforms. So all that to say, we would love for you to partner with us. Tonight's episode, and they're about $300 each to produce, is actually brought to you by the Sprott Organization. Bob Sprott is a good friend. I consider him a mentor, and he also leads a men's ministry in West Michigan called New Canaan Society, which is part of a larger movement of several chapters nationwide. And he happens to lead, along with others, another great men's ministry that's also very story-based. So it's narrative in its form and does similar things and invites men to be involved in biblical community and use a story as a centerpiece. So we're grateful for him tonight. If you'd like to sponsor our next one, we're doing these monthly right now. We would certainly love for you to do that. You can just go to graceexplorations.com and just click on the donation link, And boy, if you want to underwrite the whole program, we'll make sure that you become the sponsor of that. It's $300, or if a bunch of you can give together. And also, I would love for some of you to become monthly partners. We have several dozen people who actually support us monthly. It allows me to become and be a missionary to men, and it helps keep the movement going forward. We've done a lot of focusing on community, and we do really well in that space where we give guys a place to belong. And now we're just starting to develop some content apart from and above what we're doing live stream. We're actually building and creating a curriculum that's very story-based that we feel is very unique to the men's ministry space, that will allow men to not only hear another man's story at base camp, but actually learn skills on how to own their story. And by owning their story, it no longer owns them. And so this shattered sword, if you will, in a poetic sense, is no longer broken and splintered in shame, and they're running from their past. They're actually running towards their future because their story has come together. And the stuck parts that are stuck become unstuck, and that sword is reforged, if you will, and their story comes back to them, and they're able to offer that as strength, which is really what we're all about, and which is really why I'm excited to have my good friend, Justin Barclay, who I affectionately called Brother Barclay. Justin is in a unique space where he lives in the media world, but what I love about Justin is he's able to keep that center. He is a Christ follower, and we've been working for, it's been a number of years now, I think, where we'll have a speaker come to a base camp in the West Michigan area, whether it's Railtown Brewery or Founders or wherever else, Rockford, and soon to be Big Boiler Brewery in Lowell, and we'll have them come on to Wood Radio usually the Friday before our Sunday event. And Justin's a real pro, but what I like about him is he knows how to get to the real meat of the story. And I'm just really encouraged. We live in a crazy, chaotic time right now. And when I look at Justin's life, I see a man who is processing a lot of information, a lot of which can be viewed as very negative and difficult to process and frustrating at times. There's certainly a lot of angst and just critique that's out there. And it's not an easy job because you're filtering through a lot of stuff, and it's an open-based platform. But what I love about Justin is he's able to keep a sense of, it's beyond positivity. Although you're a positive guy by nature, what I love about him is that he's able to give people some hope and to allow the bigger story to emerge out of these smaller stories, and to keep people centered, and ultimately it points people back to Christ. And I love how he's able to use his profession and just give people hope. And he's a calm person. He's a collected person, which is really, in my opinion, just a valuable asset to have in the times that we live in. And so when I thought about who should we have speak tonight and share their story, I thought, Justin would be uniquely qualified, I think, to help us at this point in our human story and a part of our nation's story, just to bring some clarity and maybe some calmness and more than anything else, just centeredness, because everything seems to be fragmenting. And his story, personal story, could have involved a lot of personal fragmentation, and to the extent where his story could have been just absolute chaos, but we're going to step into that. So welcome, Justin, for coming. This is a little bit weird for you because I'm doing more of the talking here on the front end. You're used to being
turning the tables on me.
Yeah. So the joke was, while we were doing our warm up, have you ever been in front of a mic before? And you're like, yeah, a couple times. How long have you been actually doing DJ work? Radio world?
My first day on the air and being paid for it was Christmas Eve. I was 16 years old.
Wow.
It was the best gift. I got to do this for the first time. I was in a radio station in the middle of the night. It was overnight. It was a country station. And the only thing that I really had to do was just keep the thing on the air. Keep playing the Christmas music. Here's one from Garth Brooks. I wasn't talking even at the point. I just was playing the CDs, putting them in, and hitting play.
Yeah.
And keeping the radio station on the air. So it's been quite a while now.
Wow, and look how far God has taken you, to the extent now where you have your own show on Wood Radio, West Michigan Live, and that's a really critical hour between the national syndications and the morning drive, and just the stories that are coming up, a lot of which are actually quite positive. You've made a deliberate attempt to tell some of the stories that other people aren't telling, and it's culminated, or at least at this point in your journey, to the place where you're actually co-hosting sometimes on the Glenn Beck Show. In fact, the last time I think you and I were on the air was on the Glenn Beck Show, right?
Yeah. Well,
I was up north, and you're like, hey, I think You want to tell your resurrection story? And I was like, all right, yeah.
You mentioned stories, and so, but this is exactly what I do. Is I go around collecting these stories.
Yeah.
And you and I have been able to just do life together for a while now and experience some really cool things. And so every now and then, these stories that I'll collect, and I never know when they're going to pop up. I just think, oh, that would be perfect. And that's what happened. I know you were kind of in the middle of a little bit of a vacation, like a trip, but you jumped on with us, and then we just had this moment where God just kind of opened up a door and said, hey, why don't you share this? And that's what a lot of what I'm doing on a daily basis is anyway. It's just kind of, getting out of the way and making room and letting God do whatever it is that he wants to do that day.
Yeah, that's powerful. And that was a great opportunity for both of us. Both of our inboxes, mine was just flooded with people that had gathered hope, and it was, I think, very appropriate timing right before Christmas Eve, when we were on the radio nationwide, and just to understand that, boy, Christ really is the center, not just of the Christmas story, but the cosmic story, the big story that's not just isolated to a one-time event. So your story is a series of miracles. You're living in another miracle. You've created another miracle, I should say. And, we first connected on the radio, and, you were in your faith journey, and I didn't know where exactly you stood, but you were very interested in having us tell, in short form, redemptive stories on Wood Radio. And then that would encourage people to come and hear the rest of the story at the time, which was only Founders, and now it's in 9 different breweries.
Incredible.
And that's been another God thing, something that was larger than both of us, and I appreciate that partnership. But as I got to know you, I saw, wow, this guy is really there's some spiritual things happening, and then we figured out, let's turn the table again, and let's give Justin an opportunity to not tell someone else's story, but tell your story. And that culminated with, was that a year ago, or how long ago was that, 2 years ago?
It's been, I think it was a year in November.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then you came, and what
time is kind of strange lately. I don't know if you've got a chance to see it like I have, but to me it seems like it moves super fast but also slow at the same time.
Yeah.
And that, to me, tells me I think we're just living in these very unusual times. That God is outside of time, right?
Yep.
So if I think maybe if we're leaning into him and doing it right, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit, maybe that's how it's supposed to feel.
Well, the mystics always talked about how eternity is like a never-ending now. It's an eternal now. It's just, you're always now, but you're now forever. And I find that when God is really doing something deep, it has that timeless, time outside time quality to it, where the clock is ticking, but it feels like there's some other dimension that's happening that is stronger than time.
Yeah.
Right? It's more of a season that God brings a soul into to reach another level of maturation and maturity. And I feel like, just being a bystander to your story, it's been really cool to see a guy who had a church background, but was really trying to figure out, what exactly do I believe and where do I fit into this larger story? Maybe you could take us into the time when we first began talking about your spiritual journey, and what event was surrounding that at that moment that was really a pretty big deal in your life.
Yeah, so you asked me to talk, and I thought, oh, sure. I said, yeah, okay, because I just felt like that was the right thing to do. But then I thought, what does he want me to talk about? I don't know, and then the pieces sort of started to come together. It was what I was experiencing at that moment, and kind of the walk that I'd gone through in that time. There was a few things that lined up all at the same time in this very strange sort of way. But all in a matter of just months, I was able to get in touch with and discover my birth mother, my biological father, my family, these people that I didn't know. After 40 years, I was adopted. So after 40 years, I was able to get back in touch with them, reconnect, and since them, just incredible stories about people that, I never really knew. I had a feeling that they were there, but I never really knew. All at the same time, I dropped like almost 100 pounds,
Wow.
And all of these things kind of coming together, and also reigniting sort of this purpose of, what I'm supposed to be doing, and almost a calling, and it all sort of came together. And again, I don't think there's any mistake for that. You played a big role in that too, by noticing something and saying, hey, I think you should talk about this. Would you share your story? Because I think a lot of times you may be in the same boat, but I'm looking at other people's stories.
Right.
And so sometimes I don't even notice what God's doing in my own life.
You're too close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need somebody that's outside, that's objective, and that can see, and that's one of the things that we do at Grace Explorations and that I love about you is everybody can dig for dirt. And there are people that make a living off of that, and some people have to do that. If it's an investigative process, I really have a lot of respect for people that have to do that for a living because it's legal and there's criminal impact. But for those of us that are in the redemptive cycle, we tend to skew more towards going for the gold and find the image of Christ in someone and seeing the glory that's inside of them and the unique thing that they bring to this world. That if they don't bring it to the world, it's like C.S. Lewis talked about, it feels like there's a broken bone in the universe. There's something skeletal and elemental to the world at large. And if they don't bring that gift to the table, it's so unique that we'll be less for it.
I think everybody's got that too.
I do too. We all bear the image.
Yeah.
We're all Christ-bearing images. Now, some of us, it's a little dirtied up, and it's hard to see that. And our current culture has a way of exasperating that and aggravating that, but we all inherently and intuitively are children of God. We're created in His image. And it's just that some of us are not aware of that, or certainly don't live towards that, or find that to be unbelievable. So our identity is skewed, and we don't know who we are, and so we don't know exactly what to do. But connecting with your birth mom, and I'm trying to recollect, I'm trying to remember where I was, but I think I was helping... I was with a group of men, and we were helping a widow move some stuff into her home. We were doing something along that. I think my phone rang, my cell phone, and you were on the other end. I think you were at that point just ready to step into the apartment complex to meet your dad.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to recollect that, but it was like, hey, I'm just about ready to meet my dad.
So I met my mom, who for 40 years had been looking for me, and this story, it really, it's really come, just full circle, because there was so much in that story of, she at the time was a young mother. She was, I think, 17, and her family, at the time, her mom and whatnot said, it would be best if you would give this child up for adoption. She saw a lot of things going on in her life. In fact, her sister had just had a child, and her sister's just a little older than she is. And I think that probably added to the complications of things in the family. And they said, okay, we probably have enough, and this would be better if we just did this. And so she went to live with one of these. It was a Catholic home for unwed mothers, and she was there for a while until she gave birth to me. And the story that, to me, rings the most, I think, touching out of what happened with her and our reconnection is that the last time she physically saw me, I was 2 days old.
Wow. She,
as we'll talk about in a little bit, as I'm starting to learn now, because I'm now a father, saw me through the window. I was in the nursery, and a nurse came in and she said, "Do you think I could hold him?" And so the nurse said, "Yeah, let me go check. I'll be right back." She never came back, and eventually they came and just closed that curtain. That was the last time she had seen me.
Were they concerned with the bond that could happen and that?
I would imagine.
It's hard to know. Yeah.
I don't know the entire process for everything that played out. I am confident, though, that, and I am so grateful, that she chose life, that this was very hard for her to go through. I think God is still working with us and her too in the healing, some of the trauma that goes through, because I don't really think she really ever wanted to do this. This is not something but it was something that she felt she had to do. The only reason I say that is because, and we'll talk more about this later too, but even in those moments, even in some of the toughest moments, God was still working.
Yeah.
And there was something that he was working there. I believe that everything happened the way it was supposed to. She asked that I was raised in a family that went to church. That was a request she made. And so I was placed with a family who took me in, couldn't have kids, had several miscarriages, and said, finally, I think we're just going to adopt. And they did. They took me in, and within, I guess they got me when I was 3 months old, and within just a few short months. Matter of fact, I know now because I came home my gotcha day, right? It was October 12th. That's a day after my mom's birthday, the mom who raised me.
Yeah.
A day after her birthday, and less than a year later, on October 8th, my brother was born. So they were told, they thought, we can't have kids. There's a miracle that happens, and this is not uncommon that families will adopt with the pressure and whatnot. Well, they'll adopt, and then eventually it's like that.
That's amazing.
Everything just kind of works and opens up, and that they're able to have this child. So there's a miracle there. We don't know why, but I'd tell you now, I have, 2 nephews and a niece that are here because of that. Incredible. We don't know how these things are going to work out. And when I've talked about this before, you and I kind of look at the way Steve Jobs used to look at these things, as he talked about in this great commencement speech, that you just never understand until you look back and you see the dots connect.
Right.
And so now we get a little more time and a little more distance, and I start to see, okay, the dots are connecting. And the moment you were just talking about was the moment I go to knock on my biological father's door at his apartment. I had just happened to be in town, and I said, okay, I think I'm going to go visit him.
And this is in Indiana.
Yeah, in my hometown. I had just come from visiting my folks back there, and I didn't tell anybody, but I just thought, I think I'm going to do this. The reason is someone that you and I both know, I sat down with. He was adopted. At 18, he went to find his birth parents, and he found out when he went searching for his father that his father had already passed.
Yeah.
And he told me, this was all very new, and I said, I really think I need to go see him, but I'm not really sure because, I want to give him the distance and allow him, the opportunity if he'd like. He knew that I was around, and he knew that he and my mom had talked, and so she had told him that I had searched her out and that I'd love to meet him, and but I was just going to let him do that on his own time. He said to me in that conversation, if I could only just have 5 minutes with my dad, just 5 minutes. And it really hit me. And so he said, you just go knock. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
You don't know. And then, and I said at that point, okay, I'm doing this. And I think it was really because, not so much for me, maybe even not so much for my birth father at that, or my biological father at that point, but for this guy who asked me, maybe I'm supposed to walk through this thing. Maybe it's about something bigger than me, right? So I did, and dots connecting. I called you because we had done life together a little bit. We had been, you'd been a part of my life, and we'd been talking, and I thought, man, before I walk through this door, literally and figuratively, before I walk through this door, why don't I call Kevin, and I just ask you to pray for me at that point, that I may, maybe that, that I do and say whatever needs to be done, because I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But maybe I can just let God work here. And you were, you were great. You prayed with me on the phone, and I remember we talked about time a second ago, but I remember getting out of the car. And literally, because I was at this point where I thought to myself, well, okay, maybe I don't have to do that. Nobody knows. Kevin knows, but no, nobody knows that I'm here. I could just leave. But I said, no, I'm going to do it. So I get out of the car, and I remember time just kind of slowed down. It's like almost like when you jump out of an airplane, like I kind of imagine like you have this decision, like, okay, I've jumped, so this is it. But time just slowed down. I got to the door. I knocked on that door, and it swung open, and he was standing right there. And I said, Charlie? He said, yeah, bub. I said, hi, I'm Justin. He goes, oh, I know. I know who you are. He said, come on in. And we talked, again, another time thing, for hours. It just flew by. I had no idea when I looked down at my clock. I thought, well, maybe I've been here for 30 minutes, maybe an hour. It was hours we talked, got to know him and, his family and history, and found out a lot of things that I had no idea. Matter of fact, I found out I went to school with a cousin of mine I grew up with. I didn't know, so it was incredible. And God's still working in these relationships too. I don't think he ever stops there, but just the power of being able to step back in those moments and say, okay, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'm just going to walk through it with you, whatever you tell me to do.
I wonder if that feels emblematic of our encounter with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, I don't know what's on the other end of that door. I don't know how he's going to greet me. I mean, he's obviously known everything about you, just like your dad, hey, bub, I know who you are.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, when you were speaking about that, I was like, man, that just feels like a lot of our encounters with the divine, with God, of what does he think about me? Does he want me? What's he going to say? Where you been all my, and it's not a total parallel, because God is not comparative to any earthly dad that we have. But when you were unwrapping that story, I was thinking, man, this is so emblematic of how many of us approach the Almighty. What's he going to say? How much does he know? Does he want to be with me? Is he going to reject me? And we both have experienced, that after trial and error through the various stages of our life, that God is immensely fond of us.
Yeah.
Not just love, because that sounds like, well, he's supposed to do. That's what God is, right? He's love. So that's a covenantal, if that's a word, agreement. He can't break that. And he's supposed, but liking, that's a deeper form of
Yeah, because you love some folks, but you don't necessarily like them.
yeah. But fondness, though, of, hey, I would rather be. Then there's something familial that's taking place that's really deeper. And I think that may have been what I was sensing your story is like, wow, this guy is paralleling here, reconnecting with his biological parents. There's just a lot of parallels here to our own spiritual journey as it relates to God the Father. And how do we connect with this? I mean, when you look at the deepest wounds in a man's life, or his deepest affirmations, they come from a father to a son. And all the great stories, whether it's Star Wars or whatever, there's always that tension with father and son. And even in the Holy Trinity, there's a dynamic there of father and son, and how the world was changed through that relationship. And so when I looked at your story, I was like, there is tremendous application here. That, again, looking from the outside, I think it's physical in its texture and in its form, but there's some spiritual stuff that are going on here that's going to connect. And I can only imagine that now you're a parent. Now you're probably connecting with, boy, that must have hurt for my mother to have to be parted from me.
I can't imagine.
It's almost unimaginable.
Well, you bring this up, but every day we have to leave where my daughter is. She was born 27 weeks and almost 3 months too early.
How much did she weigh at birth?
She weighed about 2 pounds, 6 ounces.
Wow.
And so I leave every day, and my wife and I are there every day, but we have to leave her at the hospital, at the NICU. Now she's coming along, so she's great. She's perfect. She just was a little anxious, a little early to get here.
Yeah.
Excited to start living, and I know she's going to do so many great things. I know God's got a big, big call in her life. But it's so tough to leave, and I've never really known what love is. I've been loved, right? But I didn't even really know. Part of it prepares me of getting to talk to my birth mom. I'm going to tell you, my parents love me. There's no mistake in that. And it was like hitting the lottery, the great family. They took me to church. They are hugely responsible for the man that I am today, right?
Yeah.
But getting to know the way she loved me, right, and just ached for me, and to be reunited with her in the moment that happened, and being able to spend time with her and talk on the phone with her and just reconnect, and having so many of these bonds, that's another piece of it too. But understanding that, and then understanding what it's actually like to be a father and to have all of this love for this little child that I'm holding. I've never experienced anything quite like that. Now, I know they say that, and I've heard that before, but you don't know what that means until you actually experience it.
Yeah.
I would do things for this child that I would never think of doing. I would kill for this child. I would never think of any of these things, but in order to protect and to be there for her, right? And holding her in my arms now. She was 2 pounds 6 ounces. Now she's 5 pounds 3 ounces today. She's 7 weeks old today. And just to be able to see God work outside of the womb, I know He knew her even before He knitted her together in her mother's womb. Mm-hmm. But to see His work in action on the outside has been such a blessing. That's part of the calm and the chaos that we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. But I never knew even quite what His love, God's love for us might be like, because until I became a father, because I'm telling you the way that I understand it and the way I know you understand it now doesn't even barely scratch the surface of what His love is for us. And I'll look at her and I'll go, oh, look at that. Isn't she so cute? She just made this face. Or, oh my gosh, that's so precious. She just did this. We got some problems with gas right now. And that's even funny and amazing to watch, right? Can you imagine the way He looks at us? I mean, even in some of our darkest times, the way God looks at us and the love He still has for us, and all the shame and the guilt that we feel around some of those moments, and yet He still loves us.
Yeah.
Has a fondness for us that you just described that is almost unimaginable.
Yeah, Brennan Manning, who's a favorite author, an interesting guy, very interesting story. He passed away, I think, a year or two ago, or maybe longer. But he was quoted as saying that he thought that when a lot of us reached into eternity, rather than some kind of cosmic Santa Claus moment where all of our good is weighed against our bad, he thought that Christ would just come to us and just say, "Did you ever really know how much I loved you?" And he used that in a lot of his writings, and I thought, boy, that is pretty profound. Did you ever have a clue as to how much I actually loved you? And if we actually were able to embrace that and to be able to understand that as best as we can as mortals, as humans, I think it would just change everything, which kind of ties in and segues into a lot of, I think, a lot of parental fears that are out there right now, where they are very concerned that maybe for the first time in at least our nation's history, that we may be looking at, in some ways across the landscape, a very different world for our children than what we grew up in. And so every parent's hope is that their children go further, they go higher, they do better on all spectrums of life. And when you're faced with the potential reality, again, depending on perspective of, it may be more difficult than it was for us, for them. I know my parents both grew up out of World War II, Dutch immigrants. They came here because of the dream of America, the shining city on a hill, and were able to do a lot of things with limited education, but with a lot of opportunity. Yeah. And they were very happy that their children were able to take the torch a little bit further in many ways. And so maybe speak to a little bit about, what would you say to parents in that space where, because we just heard it tonight, before the interview together, of just this concern of, I am concerned that the place that my children are growing up in is going to be worse than what I experienced when I was their age.
I understand that. I feel that frustration. And
do you think that's driving a lot of the angst that's out there, and the concern is just, man, they're grappling with a very different outcome?
We live in a fallen world, right? As much as we would like it to be perfect, and as much as we would like to see certain outcomes, those outcomes aren't always guaranteed. I think we forget about that. As much as we see of how the world is in such a state as it is right now, we still have to look for the good.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that, my baby is healthy. She's in the NICU, right? And she's been there for 7 weeks, and then she's probably got at least a couple more weeks, maybe more, in there, as she just continues to develop, we want to bring her home right now. That's what we want. We want to bring her home right now. Maybe the best thing for her is to stay there a little longer. And so we have had to ride this line in the balance of letting go. I know it sounds cliche, but just letting go and letting God and saying, okay, He's got a plan. And thank you, God, that she's healthy. Thank you that she's being treated by some of the best doctors in the entire world where she is, at a world-class facility. Thank you that we are able to go and see her and be with her. You know, I am, as we are in the NICU in this little area in the hospital, at this world-class children's hospital, we are just steps away from other babies who aren't doing as well as she is.
Yeah.
In a NICU, you have babies all the way from babies that were born at term and maybe just had a little breathing issue, and they're going to go home in a day or so. They just wanted to monitor them, all the way to babies who are born who had very serious issues and had require surgeries, and families that may even lose babies that are in those facilities that won't come home. They won't come home. Here we are, just we're a little impatient because we wish that she would be home right now. We want to bring her home right now. There are this is a fact. There are families that won't bring their baby home from that facility. And the same is true with what we're dealing with in the world right now and what we're dealing with in our lives right now. But our tendency, because we choose to focus on certain things, and of course you pay attention to certain news outlets and channels. If it bleeds, it leads. This is just something that they've decided and kind of understood to drive ratings and revenue. This is their business model, that what they're going to do is they're going to bombard you with the sky is falling, the news that the sky is falling.
It sells.
And that was very intentional, specifically in the last 4 years, without getting into politics. It was just very intentional. We've kind of hit an interesting point where it'll be a balance to see where they go next. They still want to give that sort of fear-mongering. Even if you watch the weather. I mean, you don't have to watch the news. Let's take politics all the way out. Let's bring the weather. There's never not politics in some of this stuff, but even the weather. Every snowstorm. People run out and get eggs and milk and all this bread and all this.
We're supposed to have a big storm this weekend. You know?
They run out and they go crazy getting this stuff. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good idea to be prepared, because I think we should be prepared, right? But also, why do we do that? Well, we run out doing that because we want to have some sense of control over something.
That's the buzzword.
At the end of the day, though, the reality is this: God is in control.
Right.
That's the reality. There are certain things that I can do and that are prudent and wise, and I should be able to be prepared to, provide and protect for my family, those things. And I think parents are it's very realistic for them to look at the world and go, well, I just don't like the way things are headed right now. I don't maybe like the way things are looking. I'm concerned about these things. I think that's prudent. And maybe to ask those questions, okay, what can I do knowing this? And then I think the next step is maybe to spend some time in prayer and ask God, what should I do here? What am I supposed to do here? Because I can tell you that while things certainly look bad at sometimes, they're not the worst they've ever been.
Right.
We've got a long way to go before we get to that point. I'm not saying we're not headed there and we shouldn't be concerned about that, right? But we do also need to thank God for where we are, for his protections, for what he's provided. Because I'm going to tell you, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I woke up this morning, I went into the bathroom before I did any business. I flipped the switch, the lights came on like magic. I got in the shower, turned that on, and not just hot, but clean water came out. I mean, we've got a lot to be grateful for, and we forget, I think, about those things when we're ordering up on demand like we do with everything else nowadays,
right.
The world that we want to live in, with the control that we want to have. And there are times that you just realize, like I have in the last couple of months here for sure, when my wife's water broke at 27 weeks, that's not what we had planned.
Right.
That is not.
Any illusions of control were shattered in that moment.
That is not the Christmas we had planned. That's not the last 2 months we had planned. And it's not easy. It hasn't been easy for her. It hasn't been easy for me. It hasn't been easy for her family. But it is reality, right? We had to deal with where we are now while also looking for the good.
Yeah, and so I think what you're saying is that God's sovereign, and I think where the tension point comes is where does God's sovereignty end and where does human responsibility begin and end? So they both have beginning and endings, and I think that it requires a special place for you to be able to hold those both in tension. So it'd be very easy for me as a parent right now to say, man, my kids are going through stuff that I had never went through. Well, it's equally true that I went through stuff that my kids didn't go through as well.
That's true.
So there's a equality of truth there. But the thing that I keep coming back to is how do we get to this space where we can hold both of those things in tension, that yes, we have human responsibility. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
We can vote. We can do things that make a difference. But the other issue is where does God's sovereignty play into this? And I've come to discover, and this is a fancy word, and I'll just throw it out there, and you guys can research it on your own, but I think that the ability that Christ had to handle the complexity of the culture that he lived in and stay true to his mission, which was more spiritual than anything else. Yeah. He was looking at the cosmic war rather than the cultural battles, and so he focused all of his attention towards that, was that Christ was what I would say to be a non-dual thinker. And what do I mean by non-dual? I'll just give you a real quick lesson in this, and again, it's not academic, these are layman's terms, but it's the idea that evil is not equal to good. Good is more powerful than evil. And evil...
And I believe there's more of it happening around us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And evil, equally true, is not eternal. There was a time and space, and we know this from Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, that evil was not there in the very beginning. It was just all good.
Yeah.
And then an angel fell, and his name was Lucifer, and all these accounts that are taking that. And so if that's true, if evil is not equal to good, and if good is so great that it can actually use evil to accomplish a greater good, right? Your wife giving birth that many weeks, that's not a good thing inherently. If you just took that on face value, that's a difficult, uncharted, uncontrollable element that if you were writing the script, you wouldn't write that script. But what if good is so powerful and so all-encompassing that the beginning of the story was all good, and we know from the book of Revelations, you have the word out there. What if we look at the book of Revelation and we realize that at the very end of the time-space continuum, there will be no more evil?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what Christ was able to hold in tension, was why he was able to sleep on boats that were in the middle of a storm, why he was able to walk through crowds with stones, because he knew that he was right in the moment, and he knew that God had a plan, and nothing could prevent that plan. Now, he was responsible for doing different things, and his disciples, sometimes he told them to take up a sword, sometimes he told them to lay it down. That involves human wisdom. When does that end and when does that begin? But I think what we're tackling here is this idea of how do we let go of control while at the same time doing what we should do?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a whole other issue there, but you have to deal with that every day on a daily basis.
So I have this thing that I've just started this recently. It's called the Good News Letter, and I send it out to people.
I love it. You just started it, last couple of months?
Partially because I've been just talking about good news. I believe there's more good happening than what we hear, right? And as you said, I think there's more power in it. And isn't it the trick of evil to convince us that evil is more powerful than good and that we should focus on it?
Well, we almost have a Star Wars theology.
Yeah.
You know, all throughout the narrative of that mythology, it's like, man, evil is just pervasive. And then at the last moment, a desperate attempt is made by a small group of people, and then it shifts the narrative a whole other direction. But I think people, their Christian worldview is skewed to the extent where some of these things are too complex for us to understand. And sometimes some bad things need to happen to create an ultimate good.
Yeah.
Tolkien called it a You Catastrophe, a sudden turn of good events. And if we read the Bible correctly, in some ways, it's got to get a little crazy before the really, really good can happen.
So all good things, right? All things work together for good, right? And all things from God are good. So I don't think, and you mentioned this, but God isn't planning these evil things, right?
He's just using them as a servant. You know, they're a toolbox.
He says, okay, well, that's fine. You want to do that, but look what I'm going to do. You know? And I think part of the trick of learning this for me has been looking at the world, but also saying, you know, instead of, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this happened today and my car wouldn't start and all these negative things that this on the surface you look at and you think to myself, this is incredible. I can't believe all these bad things happen. But instead, learning that muscle that just shifts these things into, oh my goodness, what can you imagine, Kevin, what God is going to do with this? This is going to be incredible. And looking at things that happen as an opportunity for God to show how good he is.
Yeah.
If we don't have these opportunities, we'll never know.
Well, see, that's the glory of God inside of you
Yeah.
that draws me to you. You've been faced with a number of difficulties, and you're dealing with a lot of difficulties on a daily basis.
You know what?
But you're always
so
pointing to
many
that.
people that are worse off than I am.
Yep.
You know, and I think that's what we have to all look at. And this is what I read today that really hit me was consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. This is James chapter 1, verse 2. And it goes on to say, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. In other words, you have to be tested in order to develop this perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. You know, I think to myself about what is the work that God is doing inside of me? What is he doing in this world? If you look at the bad and realize that he is still at work, and that evil, that whatever you're looking at, whatever the bad is, it has no power against him.
Mm-hmm.
He has the power. That is our choice then, right? We have this free will to choose what we focus on. And the question is, what good is God doing here? That's the question that I want to ask. That's the question that I want to focus on, because I seek and ye shall find. And there's also a scientific thing that's happening here in the reticular activating system of the brain, where we have this pattern recognition, the way that God designed us, that we can see things popping out. So when we're looking for them, it's like the new car effect. You go drive off a lot and you get this brand new, bright red Volkswagen Beetle, and all of a sudden, you thought you were the only one, but all of a sudden you start to see them everywhere. That's the way God designed us, right? That's the reticular activating system. Well, it's the same way. If you're looking for bad, you're always going to find it.
Yeah.
If you're looking for the good in the world, you're always going to find it. And I'll share with you, if you want, a couple of things that I do every day to sort of...
I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Because if anyone, you're consuming a lot of what could be negative information every day.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that really, I just, you encourage me with that, because I'm like, wow, this guy has an opportunity to just go all negative. And because we know that has an attractive base to it, right? Mm-hmm. Fear is a powerful emotion.
Yeah.
Faith is, somewhat out there, and people don't know necessarily what to do with that. But fear is accessible. It's visceral. It's right there. It's emotive. So it has a way of drawing people in. But I would be curious in our closing moments here is just give people like a blueprint at how do you stay positive in a negative world.
Well, think about this before I get into that. Fear is faith, just in the wrong thing.
Interesting. Yeah, if you're afraid, you have belief that something bad's going to happen.
Now, I'm not saying that it's not healthy to have a bit of fear. I want to know that if I touch something hot, the stove or something, that, hey, you got to be careful. But fear, overwhelming fear, and letting it rule your life is faith in the wrong thing.
That's true.
So what I do when I sit down and I want to look at the good, a couple of things. I don't think that you need to bury your head in the sand. I want to know what's going on. And for my job, for my calling, now not everybody's going to want to maybe look at the news every day, but that's my calling. My calling is to be with people. I have a talk show, a program that I talk about what matters most. And I'm going to talk about, here are the things that are happening. Here's what you might need to know, but here's the context. Maybe here's why this isn't so bad, or maybe this is why this is worse, but you can be prepared. And I want to give some action steps to that too. So I'm not telling you to put your bury your head in the sand like an ostrich or whatever. I do think you need to know about what's going on, but I think we focus too much on what's happening in the world, and I know I'm guilty of this, and not enough time in the Word. So I want to get into this. I want to hear from God in the morning, and I want to thank Him. Thank you, Jesus, when I wake up.
You start your day that way.
I'm going to start my day in prayer. I'm going to read Jesus Calling. We were talking about that, and a lot of times that leads me right into someplace in here. I try, recently through the last few years to read a proverb for the day. Today is the 25th, so I'm going to read chapter 25. I just want to get this in me and continue to do that. because this is the truth.
Right.
All that other stuff, yeah, I need to know about it. I need to know what the weather's like so I can be ready. You know, if we're going to have a snowstorm, I need to be prepared for that. But this is what matters most. So I'm going to spend time doing that. And I'll tell you the other thing I do is I sit and I make a list. And it can be something simple. You can do this right where you are, no matter what time it is. You know, you can pull your phone, you can get a piece of paper and write this down. But I just write 3 things that I'm grateful for right now. And it could be anything. In the morning, it could be a cup of coffee.
Wow.
It could be the sunshine that day. It could be anything.
You're making a deliberate choice to be thankful.
I'm looking for, and that's what's enter his gates with thanksgiving and praise.
Yeah.
We've got to say thank you because no matter where we are or how bad life might seem, and I've got it good, so I'm maybe not the best messenger for this, but I know some people who've been through some real tough times, some real bad things. And you do too. We have some mutual friends. Yet they have chosen, and God has just given them this joy. This is a gift, If they can do this, maybe I can too. So I'm going to focus on what are the 3 things. Then I'll even maybe ask myself, what would make today great? What are some things that I'm looking forward to today? And at the end of the day, when I'm wrapping it all up, hey, I'm going to thank him again. But I'm going to just maybe write down, what were the things that, maybe someplace that I saw him really working today. Something that was amazing. For me, it's always going to be, in these times right now, even though we're in the NICU, it's holding that baby. Time just stands still.
Yeah.
And nothing else matters when I'm holding her. And that, because she's a miracle, is a true gift from God. There's no other way to describe that for me. It's just holding that baby in that moment. And I'm going to tell you, I'm a big proponent of looking for these because miracles are happening all around us every single day. We just don't take the time because we're so caught up in the world and everything that's going on. Our fast-paced lives are just moving at lightning speed. But we don't take the time to notice the miracle that I know is happening right inside of you right now. You're not supposed to be here right now, and yet you are, and your heart is pumping, and you're processing what I'm saying, and you're breathing, and you're not even thinking about that until I just mentioned it. But it's a true miracle. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
We are talking to people, even in a pandemic, in their homes, no matter where they are, they got their phones out. We are talking to people maybe across the globe right now, and we're sharing what God has done in our lives and what Christ means to us. There are miracles happening all around us, and we don't take enough time to really give them the due that they deserve. That's it.
That's a good word. And I like it's simple, but it's profound and it's deliberate. I mean, you are practicing what I would consider to be the presence of God. You're inviting him into the space that you live in with the gift of gratitude, which is against human nature because we tend to grumble rather than be gracious. We tend to want to seek justice rather than grace, maybe a little bit of mercy in there. But for those of you that are viewing and watching, maybe it's as simple as this. Do you really trust God that he knows what he's up to? Or do you believe it's all up to you? And in this closing moment, I would like to just draw a parallel to the beginning of your story, which was the whole issue of adoption and being adopted and coming out of that space. And I had someone tell me a couple of years ago, a good friend, he just was very blunt, which I typically respond to because sometimes I don't get it the first time around, so you got to be really, just say it the way it is. He just said, Kev, you're living like an orphan. And I thought, well, I don't know what that exactly means. And so he unpacked it. He said, you really believe that everything is all up to you. And you do not have a deep sense of sonship with Almighty God. You're living from a place where you're outside of this idea of being a beloved son, and you're living in performance metrics, and you're on the performance treadmill. And he essentially said, you just need to ditch the treadmill and take up and dare the trail. This is a pilgrimage. This is a journey. You're not alone. You're never alone. And at the end of the day, you are a beloved son. And with sonship comes all of these things that slaves and servants and even sheep can't connect with, or soldiers even for that matter. Although all those metaphors can work in their own way, the highest part of that metaphoric mountain is to be a son. And I think the great transformation that's happened in your life is, regardless of who raised you and who brought you into this world, at the end of the day, you are God's son. In an adoptive sense, you're ingrained and grafted into this larger tree that becomes part of your family. And when you know that, when you have a sense of identity and you are a son, you can kind of relax a little bit, because just like your child being in your arms, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And there's something about God, I think, where he just doesn't get all riled up about the things that we get all riled up about, because he's got us in his hands. And in the cosmic, larger sense, he has the whole planet in his hands. And maybe what he's just trying to tell us tonight through this simple podcast is trust me that I know what I'm doing. I've got a plan, and the complexities of it you can't comprehend. You don't have the bandwidth that I have. And if you did, your mind would explode into billions of different particles. You just cannot comprehend what I'm doing behind the scenes. It looks really rough. It looks really distorted and chaotic on the front end, but the portrait that's coming together, the pixelated portrait of all of these galactic dots that are just kind of floating in the universe, disconnected stories, and all of these things that don't seem to have any connection to them, God is busy collecting and connecting those dots into a beautiful portrait. And I think when that portrait all comes together, it's going to be a picture of his bride. And when that portrait is complete, the king will come, and then we're going to enter into the last chapter of Revelation, where we get into this space where there is no more evil as it was in the very beginning. And I know this is kind of like a Marvel comic series, because the end game had a lot of that element of all of these people who are outside the story all of a sudden are articulated and are brought back into this space where everybody's back together again. And I think that speaks to this this thing that we have inside of us, where I believe that we know that somehow, especially those of us that are following Christ, this story is going to end well, the big story. And let's trust him with these smaller ones. And let's look, I mean, you're an example to people. And I just want to, again, commend you for using the platform that God has given you, not just to be a conduit of news and a listening base, but you're giving people hope. And ultimately, that's always found in Christ. So thank you for your ministry. Thank you for partnering with us. Yeah. Thank you for being with us here. Any closing final thoughts?
I'll tell you the same thing. When people ask me leading up to the election, what's going to happen? I would always say, I don't know. And it's the same thing today. People are wondering, what's going to happen? We're in some times right now that we're uncertain. Now, there's only one really that's certain, and that is God is still in control.
Yes.
And he's still on the throne. And that is the good news. That's the news that is eternal. And that's the news that won't ever change.
That's true. Let's just close on a word of prayer here tonight. Father, thank you for inviting us into your family. Thank you for calling us your sons and your daughters. Thank you that you look at us the way a parent would a child. And there's just a tremendous sense of calmness and centeredness that you bring when you're with your children. And so I pray for all of us that we would realize that whether we're a parent or not, that you are our Father, and we are your sons, and we are your daughters, and you have a plan. And we need to trust that you know exactly what you're doing, even when the story we're living in doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know the end, you know the beginning, you know everything in between. And so I just pray for those that are viewing, those that are listening, that we would just place our trust ultimately in you, and that you would give us the wisdom and the knowledge of what we can do to join in the story that you are writing. And forgive us for preempting, and forgive us for trying to write our own story. We know that you tell your story through human stories. So help us with that, God, that we would join the big story, the story that's actually worth living, the story that's worth telling. We thank you for that now in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.